The stagecoach rattled into Deadwood, Dakota territory on a blistering afternoon in June of 1878, and Catherine Morgan knew her carefully constructed lies were about to crumble like dried adobe in a rainstorm. She pressed one trembling hand against her stomach, still flat beneath her dark traveling dress, and felt the secret growing there like a wildfire she could not contain. 3 months along, the doctor in Cheyenne had told her, and she had exactly enough time to find someplace safe before the whole world would know her shame. The main street stretched before her in a chaos of mud and lumber, newly built storefronts standing shoulder to shoulder with canvas tents and hastily constructed saloons. Men covered in dust from the gold mines stumbled past, their eyes hungry for anything that reminded them of civilization. Catherine pulled her shawl tighter despite the heat and stepped down from the coach, her boots sinking slightly into the churned earth. She had 2 carpet bags, $17 to her name, and nowhere to go except the address scrawled on a piece of paper in her reticule. Her cousin Sarah had married a shopkeeper here, and Catherine was praying that family obligation would be stronger than moral judgment. "Watch yourself, miss," a deep voice said behind her. And Catherine turned to find herself looking up at a man who seemed carved from the same rough granite as the Black Hills themselves. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his worn hat, and eyes the color of whiskey held up to lamplight. Dust covered his clothes and a gun belt hung low on his hips. "Town's not kind to women traveling alone?" "I can manage," Catherine said, hearing the tremor in her own voice betray her words. The man studied her for a moment, and Catherine felt transparent as glass under that gaze. Then he touched the brim of his hat and moved past her toward the stagecoach office. Catherine gathered her bags and started walking, counting buildings until she found the one that matched Sarah's description. Morgan's General Store, the sign read, and Catherine felt a flutter of relief that her cousin had kept their family name in the business. Sarah answered her knock. Older than Catherine remembered, her face lined with the hardships of frontier life. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by surprise and something that might have been concern. "Catherine? Lord above, what are you doing in Deadwood?" "I need help," Catherine said simply, and watched her cousin's eyes drop to her left hand, searching for a wedding ring that was not there. They talked in the back room while Sarah's husband minded the store. Catherine had prepared a story about a husband killed in a mining accident, about being left alone and desperate, but the lies stuck in her throat like thorns. Sarah had always been able to see through her, even when they were children playing in their grandmother's garden in Pennsylvania. "How far along?" Sarah asked quietly. 3 months, Catherine whispered, and then, because the weight of carrying it alone had become unbearable, "I do not know which man is the father." The admission hung between them like smoke. Sarah's face remained carefully neutral, but Catherine saw her hands tighten on her apron. "Tell me." So Catherine told her. About Thomas, the banker's son she had been courting properly for 6 months, whose kisses had turned urgent one evening in his father's carriage house. About James, the ranch hand who had smiled at her at the summer dance and met her 3 times in secret before disappearing without a word. 2 men in the span of 6 weeks. And then her monthly courses had stopped coming, and Catherine had known she was ruined. "Thomas would have married you," Sarah said. "His father found out about James. He called me a whore and threw me out of their house. Thomas just stood there and let him." The memory still burned. "I had to leave Cheyenne before everyone knew." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and Catherine braced herself for judgment or rejection. Instead, her cousin reached across and gripped her hand. "You can stay here. We will figure something out. Tell people you are a widow if they ask. It is not entirely uncommon, and this town is too new for many questions." Relief flooded through Catherine so powerfully she felt dizzy. "Thank you. I will work. I will earn my keep. I promise I will not be a burden." "You are family," Sarah said firmly. "We take care of our own." The next weeks passed in a blur of work and worry. Catherine helped in the store, measuring flour and cutting fabric and tallying accounts. She proved good with numbers, better than Sarah's husband Robert, and gradually she began to feel useful rather than merely tolerated. The morning sickness faded, replaced by a constant low-level exhaustion that she pushed through with determination. She saved every penny she could, tucking coins into a tin box hidden in her room. She would need money when the baby came. She would need everything. The man from the stagecoach came into the store 3 days after her arrival. Catherine was alone behind the counter, Sarah having gone home to start supper, and she felt her spine straighten automatically as he entered. Up close, she could see he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, pale against sun-darkened skin. "Help you?" Catherine asked, trying for professional courtesy. "Need ammunition. .44 caliber." His voice had a roughness to it, like he was not accustomed to much talking. Catherine found the boxes on the shelf and set them on the counter. "Anything else?" "Coffee, sugar if you have it, beans." He paused. "You work here now?" "I do." Catherine began gathering the supplies, trying to ignore the way his eyes followed her movements. She had become hyper-aware of her body since discovering her condition, convinced that everyone could somehow see the secret she carried. "Just arrived." "Figured. Would have remembered you." He said it matter-of-factly, without the leering tone she had learned to expect from men in Deadwood. "Name's Cole Brennan. I have a claim up in the hills. Come to town for supplies every week or so." "Catherine," she said, then hesitated over whether to give a last name. "Mrs. Catherine Morgan." Something flickered in his expression at the missus, but he just nodded. "Your husband working a claim too?" The lie came easier this time. "Widowed. Mining accident." "Sorry to hear it." He paid for his supplies, and Catherine noticed his hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who worked hard for everything he had. "You need anything, Mrs. Morgan, you let me know. Town can be rough." After he left, Catherine found herself thinking about him at odd moments. There had been no pity in his eyes when she mentioned being widowed, only a quiet understanding that she found strangely comforting. She saw him the following week when he came in for more supplies, and the week after that. He always asked if she needed anything, and she always said no, and gradually it became a ritual between them. Summer deepened into August, and Catherine's dresses began to strain at the waist. Sarah let them out discreetly, adding panels of fabric that would allow for expansion. In the mirror, Catherine could see the changes in her body, the slight swell of her belly, the fullness in her breasts. Fear lived in her constantly now, a cold companion that whispered about childbirth and death and babies born to women with no husbands and no means. She was closing the store alone one evening when 3 men stumbled in, drunk and looking for trouble. Catherine smelled the whiskey before they crossed the threshold, and her stomach tightened with instinctive dread. "Well now, what do we have here?" the first one said, leaning against the counter with a grin that showed missing teeth. "Pretty little thing all by herself." "We are closed," Catherine said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Come back tomorrow." "Don't want to come back tomorrow." He reached across the counter and caught her wrist. "Want some company now?" Catherine jerked back, her heart hammering. "Let go of me." "Maybe the lady needs convincing," another man said, starting to walk around the counter. The door opened behind them and Cole Brennan stepped through. He took in the situation with one quick glance and his whole demeanor changed, became something cold and dangerous. "You boys need to leave." "This is not your business," the first drunk said, but he had released Catherine's wrist. "I am making it my business." Cole's hand rested on his gun, not threatening yet, but the promise was clear. "Get out, now!" For a moment, Catherine thought they would fight, thought she would see violence erupt right there in the store. Then the 3 men seemed to collectively decide Cole was not worth the trouble. They shuffled out, muttering curses, and Cole locked the door behind them. "You all right?" he asked, turning to Catherine. She was shaking, she realized, her whole body trembling with released fear. "Yes, thank you. I do not know what would have happened if you had not come. Should not be here alone after dark." His eyes were serious. "It is not safe." "I have to work," Catherine said, hearing the defensiveness in her tone. "I do not have a choice." Something in her voice must have revealed more than she intended, because Cole looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her, and Catherine saw the exact second when he noticed. His gaze dropped to her waist, where the shawl had slipped, and the swell of her pregnancy was visible beneath her dress. When his eyes met hers again, there was understanding in them, and Catherine felt shame burn through her like fever. "I should go," she said quickly, grabbing her shawl. "Thank you again for your help." "Catherine, wait!" He caught her arm gently, and when she forced herself to meet his eyes, there was no judgment there. "Let me walk you home." They walked in silence through the muddy streets, Catherine acutely aware of his presence beside her. When they reached the door that led to the rooms above the store, she expected him to leave, but instead he spoke. "That husband of yours, the one who died, he ever exist?" Catherine's throat closed. She could lie again, should lie again, but she was so tired of carrying the weight of deception. "No." Cole nodded slowly, as if confirming something he had already suspected. "Figured. You do not look at the world like a woman in mourning." "Are you going to tell people?" Catherine asked, hating the fear in her voice. "Not my business to tell." He met her eyes squarely. "Your secret is safe with me." "Why would you help me?" The question burst out before she could stop it. "You do not know me. You do not owe me anything." Cole was quiet for a moment, looking out at the darkening street. "Had a sister once. Got herself in trouble with a man who promised her marriage and then disappeared when she told him about the baby. My father threw her out. Called her the same names I expect you have heard." His jaw tightened. "She died trying to get rid of it. I was 14. Never forgot the look on her face when Pa told her to leave." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "I am sorry." "Me too." He looked back at her. "Point is, I know what it is like for women in your situation. I know it is not always as simple as people want to make it, and I know you should not have to face it alone." Something cracked open in Catherine's chest, some locked place where she had been holding all her fear and shame and loneliness. "I do not know which man is the father," she heard herself say. "There were two of them. I thought I loved one, and the other made me feel seen, and now I do not know which one left me like this." She expected disgust, expected him to walk away, expected the kindness to drain from his face. Instead, Cole just nodded. "Does not matter to me now." The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. Catherine stared at him, not quite believing what she was hearing. "What?" "The past is past. What matters is what happens from here." He shifted his weight, suddenly looking uncertain for the first time since she had met him. "I have a claim that is starting to pay decent. Nothing grand but steady. I have been thinking about building something more permanent than a tent, making a real life here." He paused. "Would be easier with a partner." "Are you asking what I think you are asking?" Catherine's voice came out barely above a whisper. "I am saying I could use a wife, and you could use a husband, one who would not ask questions about the past or the baby." Cole's eyes were serious. "I am not a romantic man, Catherine. I cannot promise you love or poetry, but I can promise you safety, protection, a name for your child, a home." Catherine's mind whirled. She barely knew this man, but then she had barely known Thomas or James either, and look where that had led her. At least Cole was being honest about what he offered. At least he knew the truth and was not repelled by it. "I have nothing to bring to a marriage," she said. "No dowry, no connections, just scandal and another man's child. You are smart, good with numbers, not afraid of hard work." Cole's mouth quirked slightly. "That is worth more than gold out here." "Why would you do that?" Catherine asked. "Really?" Cole was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough. "Because I have spent the last month watching you hold your head high in a town that would destroy you if they knew the truth. because you did not fall apart when those men threatened you tonight, because you remind me that there's still goodness in the world worth protecting." He met her eyes. "And because when I see you, I see someone worth standing beside." Catherine felt something shift inside her, like the first crack in ice at the start of spring. This was not love, not yet, but it was something real and solid, something she could build on. "I would need time, to be sure, to know you better." "We have time," Cole said. "Baby will not come for months yet. We can figure each other out between now and then." So they began, carefully, to build something neither of them could quite name. Cole came to town twice a week now instead of once, always stopping by the store to talk to Catherine. They walked together in the evenings, chaperoned by the ever-present crowds of Deadwood. He told her about his claim, about the vein of gold he was following through the rock, about his plans for a cabin with real wood floors and glass windows. She told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, about her love of books and numbers, about her dreams of something more than what her small town could offer. "Is that why you were with those men?" Cole asked one evening as they sat on the steps outside the store. "Looking for something more?" Catherine considered the question. "Thomas was respectable, safe, everything I was supposed to want. But James made me feel alive. Made me feel like I was more than just a good girl waiting to be some man's proper wife." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I thought I was choosing my own path. Turns out I was just being foolish." "Not foolish, just young." Cole's shoulder was warm where it pressed against hers. "We all make mistakes. Question is what we do after." "What was your mistake?" Catherine asked. Cole was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "I killed a man when I was 18. He was beating a woman outside a saloon in Kansas, and I told him to stop. He went for his gun. I was faster." His voice was flat, emotionless. "It was a fair fight, but his family had money. I had to leave town in the middle of the night or face a rope. Been moving ever since. Deadwood is the first place I've thought about staying." "Does it haunt you?" Catherine asked softly. "Taking a life?" "Every day. But I would do it again. Some things are worth the cost." He turned to look at her. "You understand that. You came all the way out here alone, carrying a child, with nothing but hope and determination. That takes a different kind of courage than shooting a man." "I do not feel courageous. I feel terrified most of the time." "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing what needs to be done despite it." Cole stood and offered her his hand. "Come on, I will walk you up." September arrived with cooler nights and the first hint of gold in the aspen leaves. Catherine was 4 months along now, and the pregnancy was becoming impossible to hide. Sarah helped her fashion looser dresses, and they let it be known quietly that Mrs. Morgan was expecting her late husband's child. The women of Deadwood clucked sympathetically and brought casseroles. The men tipped their hats and offered their condolences. Catherine hated the lies, but she was learning to live with them. Cole proposed properly on a Sunday afternoon, taking her up into the hills to see his claim. The cabin was half built, the frame standing strong against the pine trees. Catherine could see where he had planned the rooms, see the care he was taking with every board and nail. "It will be finished before the first snow," Cole said, watching her explore. 3 rooms to start. We can add more later if we need to." "It is beautiful," Catherine said, and meant it. She could see a life here, see herself making a home in this place. Cole came to stand beside her, not quite touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "I know this is not what you imagined for yourself. I know I am not what you would have chosen if things were different, but I swear to you, Catherine, I will do right by you and that baby. I will protect you both with everything I have." Catherine turned to face him fully. In the months since they had met, she had learned the steadiness of him, the quiet strength that did not need to prove itself with loud words or grand gestures. She had learned that he was kind to animals and fair in his dealings, and that he laughed rarely but genuinely. She had learned that she felt safer with him than she had ever felt with Thomas or James, despite knowing him for a shorter time. "Ask me," she said. Cole reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "Catherine Morgan, will you marry me? Will you let me be a husband to you and a father to your child? Will you build a life with me here in these hills?" "Yes," Catherine said, and felt the words settle into her bones like truth. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed the following week by a traveling preacher with Sarah and Robert standing witness. Catherine wore a dress of soft blue wool that Sarah had helped her make, let out enough to accommodate her growing belly. Cole wore a new shirt and had shaved, looking almost nervous as he stood beside her. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Cole kissed her gently, a soft brush of lips that held promise rather than passion. The cabin was finished enough to live in, though Cole kept working on it every spare moment. Catherine threw herself into making it a home, sewing curtains from flour sacks and arranging their few possessions to maximum effect. She had never kept house before, had always had servants to do the cooking and cleaning, but she learned quickly through trial and error. Her first attempts at bread were like rocks, but Cole ate them without complaint and praised her when she finally produced an edible loaf. They were still learning each other, still careful and polite in many ways. Cole slept on the floor those first weeks, insisting Catherine take the bed. She protested, but he was immovable on the subject. "You are carrying a child. You need rest. I have slept on harder ground than this." But gradually, slowly, the carefulness began to ease. Catherine started to recognize the signs of Cole's moods, the way he got quiet when he was worried about the claim, the way his eyes crinkled when he was amused even if he did not smile. Cole learned that Catherine could not stand the smell of coffee in the morning anymore, that she liked to read by lamplight in the evenings, that she hummed to herself when she was content. One night in early October, Catherine woke to find Cole sitting by the fire staring into the flames. She got up carefully, her belly making her movements awkward now, and went to sit beside him. "Cannot sleep?" she asked. Cole shook his head. "Thinking." "About what?" "About whether I'm doing right by you." He glanced at her. "You should have had better than this, better than a rough cabin and a man with blood on his hands and a past he cannot escape." "I should have had a lot of things," Catherine agreed, "but I have this instead, and I find I am grateful for it." She placed her hand on her belly, where the baby had started to move. "I was so scared, Cole, so terrified of what would happen to me and this child. You gave me hope when I had none. How can that be anything but right?" Cole reached out hesitantly, then placed his hand over hers, feeling the swell of her pregnancy beneath their joined palms. "I will love this child," he said quietly, "no matter whose blood it carries. I want you to know that." Catherine felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I know. And I'm starting to love you too," Cole continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I did not expect that. Thought this would be an arrangement, a practical solution for us both. But somewhere along the way, you became more than that." "Cole," Catherine whispered, turning to face him. He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away her tears. "I am not good with words, but I need you to know that you are not alone in this. You will never be alone again." When he kissed her this time, it was different from the chaste brush of lips at their wedding. This was deeper, fuller, a claiming and a promise all at once. Catherine kissed him back, pouring all her gratitude and hope and growing affection into it. When they finally broke apart, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "Come to bed," Catherine said softly. "Really to bed. Not the floor. We are married, and I'm tired of sleeping alone." They lay together that night, Catherine curved against Cole's chest, his arm protective around her and the baby. She felt safe in a way she had not known she could feel, wrapped in the warmth of him and the solid certainty of his presence. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Winter arrived early in the Black Hills, snow falling in thick white curtains by November. Cole had stockpiled supplies and firewood, and the cabin stayed warm even as the world outside turned white and bitter. Catherine was 6 months along now, her belly round and prominent, the baby active beneath her skin. She spent her days cooking and mending and reading the books Cole had surprised her with, bought from a peddler passing through. He spent his working the claim when weather allowed, bringing home enough gold dust to keep them comfortable. They had fallen into a rhythm, a partnership that was becoming something more with each passing day. Cole talked to the baby, his hand on Catherine's stomach as he told stories about his day or plans for the future. Catherine watched him with growing tenderness. This quiet man who had taken on another man's child without hesitation or resentment. She was falling in love with him, she realized, truly and deeply in love in a way she had never experienced with Thomas or James. "Tell me about them," Cole said one snowy evening as they sat by the fire. "The men who might be the father, if you want to." Catherine was surprised by the question. Cole had never asked before, had kept his word about not prying into her past. "Why now?" "Because I want to know you. All of you. And because I think maybe you need to talk about it." He took her hand. "But only if you want to." So Catherine told him about Thomas, the banker's son who had courted her properly but never really seen her, who had loved the idea of her more than the reality, about James, the ranch hand who had been exciting and dangerous but ultimately selfish, who had disappeared the moment things became complicated, about how she had thought she wanted excitement and passion, but had learned too late the difference between infatuation and love. "I was so stupid," she said. "I thought I was being brave, taking control of my own life, but I was just reckless." "You were human," Cole said. "We all want to be seen, to be chosen. You just chose wrong." He squeezed her hand. "But you are choosing right now. Every day you get up and do the work and build this life with me, you are choosing right." "I am falling in love with you," Catherine said, the words spilling out before she could second-guess them. "I do not know when it happened, but it did. You are everything they were not. You are steady and kind and true. You see me, the real me, and you choose me anyway." Cole pulled her close as her pregnant belly would allow, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I love you too. Have for a while now. Just was not sure I had the right to say it." "You have every right," Catherine said fiercely. "You are my husband. You are going to be this baby's father, not Thomas or James. You." They made love that night for the first time, slow and careful and sweet, Cole treating her like something precious and fragile. Afterwards, Catherine lay in his arms and felt whole in a way she had never experienced before. This was what love was supposed to be, she thought. Not fireworks and passion that burned out quickly, but this steady flame that warmed from the inside out. January brought bitter cold and deep snow. Catherine was huge now, ungainly and uncomfortable, her back aching and her feet swollen. The baby pressed on her bladder constantly, and she waddled more than walked. Cole was endlessly patient, rubbing her feet and bringing her tea and building up the fire when she could not get warm. He had stopped working the claim, unwilling to leave her alone for long periods as her time drew near. Sarah came to stay a week before Catherine's due date. Experienced in childbirth from her own 3 deliveries, Catherine was grateful for her presence, for the practical knowledge that helped ease her fear. Cole hovered nervously, trying to be helpful, and mostly getting in the way until Sarah shooed him outside to chop more firewood. "He's a good man," Sarah said, watching Catherine wince through a practice contraction. "Better than I expected when you first told me you were marrying him." "He is the best man I have ever known," Catherine said simply. Labor began on a Tuesday morning, a grinding pain in her back that gradually moved to the front. Sarah timed the contractions while Cole paced like a caged animal, helpless in the face of his wife's pain. Hours passed in a blur of agony and effort. Catherine screamed and cursed and cried, gripping Sarah's hand hard enough to bruise. She had never known pain like this, had never imagined her body could endure such violence and keep functioning. I cannot, she sobbed at one point. I cannot do this. You can, Sarah said firmly. You are doing it. Just a little longer. Cole appeared at her side, his face pale but determined. He took her hand, let her squeeze it with all her strength, murmured encouragement and love into her ear. You are the strongest person I know. You can do this. I am right here. I am not going anywhere. The baby came as the sun was setting, sliding into the world with a lusty cry that filled the cabin. Sarah cleaned and wrapped the infant while Catherine lay gasping, exhausted beyond measure. Then Sarah placed the baby in her arms, and Catherine looked down at the tiny red face and felt her heart crack open with a love so fierce it was almost painful. It is a boy, Sarah said, smiling. Catherine touched the baby's cheek with one trembling finger, marveling at the perfection of him. He had dark hair and a button nose, and impossibly tiny fingers that wrapped instinctively around her thumb. Hello, little one, she whispered. I am your mama. Cole stood frozen at the foot of the bed, staring at the baby with an expression Catherine could not quite read. Fear suddenly gripped her. What if now that the baby was here, now that the reality of another man's child was crying and breathing and real, Cole changed his mind? Cole? She said hesitantly. Do you want to hold him? Cole moved slowly as if in a dream, and Sarah placed the baby carefully in his arms. He was so small against Cole's broad chest, so fragile and new. Cole looked down at him with wonder, one finger stroking the baby's cheek with infinite gentleness. He is perfect, Cole said, his voice rough. Absolutely perfect. Do you see him in there? Catherine asked quietly. Thomas or James, can you tell? Cole looked up at her, and his eyes were wet with tears. I see our son. That is all that matters. They named him Daniel, after Cole's father, who Cole had never forgiven but had loved nonetheless. Cole took to fatherhood with the same quiet determination he brought to everything else. He walked the floor with Daniel when he cried at night, changed diapers without complaint, sang off-key lullabies that somehow always soothed the baby. Catherine watched him with wonder, falling more in love with him every day. The winter passed slowly. The three of them cocooned in the cabin while snow piled high outside. It was hard work, caring for a newborn, but there was joy in it too. Daniel's first smile, his first laugh, the way he turned his head toward Cole's voice. Cole proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle and endlessly devoted. Spring came late to the Black Hills, but when it finally arrived, it was glorious. The snow melted, revealing green grass and wildflowers. Cole went back to working his claim, and Catherine strapped Daniel to her chest and worked in the garden she was planting. Life settled into a new rhythm, harder than before but richer somehow. Daniel was 3 months old when Catherine noticed the resemblance. He was lying on a blanket in the sunshine, and the light caught his face at just the right angle. Catherine felt her breath catch. He had James's chin, the same stubborn jut to his jaw. His eyes, which had started out dark, were lightening to a distinctive gray-green that Catherine had only ever seen in one person. She stood frozen, staring at her son, and felt a complicated tangle of emotions. Relief that she knew now, grief for what might have been, and underneath it all a deep gratitude that James had disappeared when he did. If he had stayed, she never would have found Cole. She never would have known this kind of love. You all right? Cole asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. I know whose son he is, Catherine said quietly. I can see it now. It is James. Cole was silent for a moment, and Catherine held her breath. Then he said, Does not change anything. How can you say that? Catherine turned to face him. He has another man's features. Every time you look at him, you will see that. I see my son, Cole said firmly. The man whose blood he carries does not matter. What matters is who raises him, who teaches him, who loves him. That is me. That will always be me. He cupped her face. You are my wife. He is my son. That is the truth that matters. Catherine threw her arms around him, holding tight. I love you so much. I love you too. Both of you. Cole kissed her forehead. Now come on, that garden will not plant itself, and this boy needs to learn about hard work early. The years passed in a blur of growth and change. The cabin expanded, growing new rooms as the family needed them. The claim continued to pay out. Not rich, but steady enough to provide a good life. Daniel grew from a baby into a toddler, into a small boy with his father's quiet determination and his mother's quick mind. He never knew he was not Cole's biological son, and by the time he was old enough to wonder about resemblances, there were other children to distract him. Catherine gave birth to a daughter when Daniel was 2, a tiny girl with Cole's whiskey-colored eyes and Catherine's dark curls. They named her Rose. Then another son came 2 years later, and they called him Samuel. The cabin rang with laughter and arguments and the constant noise of children, and Catherine found herself happier than she had ever imagined possible. She thought about Thomas and James sometimes, but they had become distant figures, characters in a story that belonged to someone else. Thomas had married, she heard through letters from Pennsylvania, a suitable girl with a suitable dowry. She hoped he was happy. James she never heard about again, and she was glad. He had given her Daniel, and for that she was grateful, but she did not want him anywhere near the life she had built. One evening when Daniel was 7, he asked about the father he had never known. Catherine's heart clenched, but she had prepared for this. She and Cole had agreed on what to say. Your first father died before you were born, Catherine said gently. He never got to meet you, but I know he would have loved you. Do I look like him? Daniel asked. Catherine glanced at Cole, who was whittling by the fire. He looked up and smiled at her, encouraging. You have some of his features, Catherine admitted, but you have your own face, your own self, and your Papa Cole has raised you since you were born. He is the one who walked you when you cried, who taught you to ride, who sits up with you when you are sick. Daniel considered this, his young face serious. Then he went to Cole and climbed into his lap. You are my real papa, he said simply. Cole's arms came around him, holding tight. You are my real son, never doubt that. The years continued to roll by, marked by seasons and harvests and the steady accumulation of life. Deadwood grew from a wild mining camp into a real town, with schools and churches and laws that were actually enforced. Cole became a respected man in the community, known for his fairness and his hard work. Catherine helped found the town's first lending library, her love of books now shared with dozens of children, including her own. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Cole took Catherine up into the hills where he had first proposed. The cabin had been replaced by a real house now, but the view was the same, pine trees stretching as far as the eye could see. Do you regret it? Cole asked. Any of it? Catherine thought about the girl she had been, desperate and scared and alone. She thought about the mistakes she had made and the consequences she had faced. She thought about how close she had come to a very different life, one without Cole or this home or the family they had built together. I regret the pain I caused myself and others, Catherine said honestly. I regret that I was so foolish and reckless, but I cannot regret the path that led me here, because it led me to you. She took his hand. You saved me, Cole Brennan. In every way a person can be saved. We saved each other, Cole said. He pulled her close, and they stood together watching the sun set over the Black Hills. You gave me something to build for, a reason to stay in one place, a family. I gave you 3 children and a lot of work, Catherine teased. Best work I have ever done. Cole kissed her, long and deep and full of a decade's worth of love. Here is to 10 more years, and 10 after that, and however many more we get. They walked back down to the house as twilight fell, hand in hand, and Catherine felt a profound sense of peace, Her life had not turned out anything like she had planned. It had been harder and scarier and required more courage than she had known she possessed, but it had also been richer and fuller and filled with more love than she had dared to dream possible. Daniel met them at the door. Rose and Samuel clustered behind him. "Mama, Papa, come on, we made you a cake and Samuel ate half the frosting." "Did not," Samuel protested. "Did too, it is all over your face." Catherine and Cole exchanged amused glances and went inside to referee, the door closing behind them on the warm, golden light of home. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the hills a coyote sang. The Wild West was slowly becoming tame, but in this house, in this family, wildness remained. The wildness of hope and second chances, of love that defied expectations and convention, of lives rebuilt from nothing into something beautiful. Years later, when Catherine was old and her children were grown with children of their own, she would tell her grandchildren about the Wild West as she had known it, about Deadwood in its rough early days, about the courage it took to build a life from scratch, about the man who had taken a chance on a desperate woman and made her whole. Daniel would stand beside Cole, the two of them so alike in bearing and character that no one would ever question their relationship. Rose would bring her sharp mind to running the family business, expanded now far beyond a single mining claim. Samuel would become a teacher, sharing his love of learning with the next generation, and Catherine would sit on her porch, Cole beside her after 50 years of marriage, and know that she had been blessed beyond measure. Not because her life had been easy, but because it had been full. Not because she had never made mistakes, but because she had been given the grace to learn from them. Not because she had married for love the first time, but because she had learned what love really meant in time to build a life on its foundation. "What are you thinking?" Cole would ask, his voice still rough even after all these years. "That I am grateful," Catherine would say, "for all of it, even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, because they brought me here." Cole would take her hand, his grip still strong despite the years, and they would sit together in comfortable silence as the sun set over the Black Hills one more time, and Catherine would close her eyes and remember the girl who stepped off a stagecoach in Deadwood with nothing but fear and hope, and she would marvel at the distance between then and now. The Wild West had been a hard teacher, but Catherine had been an excellent student. She had learned that true strength was not in never falling, but in getting back up. That love was not fireworks and passion, but the choice to stand beside someone through all the ordinary days. That family was not always blood, but the bonds you chose to forge and honor. And that sometimes the greatest adventures came not from reckless choices, but from the courage to accept help when it was offered and build something lasting from the ruins of your mistakes. In the end, that was the story Catherine would pass down. Not a tale of scandal and shame, but a love story. A Wild West romance about a man who said, "Does not matter to me now," and meant it. Who loved a woman and her child unconditionally, who proved that the best kind of love was not about grand gestures, but about showing up every single day and doing the work. It was about second chances and hard-won happiness and the fierce determination to create something good out of the broken pieces of the past. And when Catherine finally closed her eyes for the last time, decades later, it was with Cole's hand in hers and her children gathered around her and the certain knowledge that she had lived a life worth living. The Wild West had tested her in ways she never could have imagined, but it had also given her everything that mattered. A home, a family, a love that had started as convenience and grown into the defining force of her life. The story of Catherine Morgan, who became Catherine Brennan, who stepped off a stagecoach terrified and pregnant and alone, and found a cowboy willing to look past her mistakes to the woman underneath, who built a life in the Black Hills of Dakota Territory, who raised children and planted gardens and loved with her whole heart, who proved that sometimes the best endings come from the worst beginnings and that grace and second chances were the truest treasures of the Wild West. The sun set one final time over the house in the hills, the house Cole built and Catherine made a home, and a new generation took up the story. But that is another tale for another time. This one ends here, with two people who found each other when they needed it most, who chose love over judgment, who built something lasting in a world of temporary things. This is the story of a woman who did not know which man was the father, and a cowboy who said it did not matter, and they lived happily ever after in the Wild West they helped to tame.